What if I told you Meghan Markle's fairy tale was never really a fairy tale at all? What if I told you that long before Prince Harry, long before the media frenzy, long before the glittering tiaras and the royal carriages, Meghan had already drawn a map, a detailed blueprint, for how she would climb into the most famous family in the world, and then break free at the exact moment that would secure her maximum fame? Sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? But that's exactly what Doria Ragland, Meghan's mother, has finally hinted at. And once you hear her words, once you piece together the story, it will feel less like a love story and more like a carefully choreographed heist. Now stop for a second. Ask yourself this. Do you believe in coincidence? Do you believe that Meghan Markle, a struggling actress in Hollywood, just happened to stumble into the life of a British prince? Or do you believe in strategy, in ambition, in years of positioning herself for the moment when she could rewrite her destiny? And more importantly, what does it say about the institution of royalty itself that someone from the outside could walk in, bend it to her will, and then walk away richer, louder, and more famous than ever before? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's not forget, Meghan herself has always painted her royal story as an act of destiny. She says she never knew much about Harry before meeting him, that she entered the family with innocence, that she was swallowed by the crown's rigid traditions. But Doria's silence, her unwavering refusal to share details, has always been one of the biggest mysteries in this saga. Why was Meghan's mother, who stood silently at that wedding, who carried herself like a woman watching history unfold, so reserved? Why did she let Meghan's narrative dominate the world stage while she herself stayed tucked away in the shadows? Well, the silence has cracked. And when it cracked, it revealed something that changes everything. You see, people have long suspected that Meghan wasn't blindsided by royal life, but rather that she orchestrated her own exit, that the marriage wasn't the goal, it was the stepping stone, that she never wanted to stay in the palace at all, but wanted to use it as a launchpad to become bigger than Hollywood ever allowed her to be. And now, with Doria's words finally surfacing, it seems those suspicions were never paranoia, they were prophecy. But let's rewind, because before we can even begin to understand the weight of Doria's confession, we need to retrace Meghan's path. Who was she before Harry? What patterns reveal themselves in hindsight? And how did her mother, the woman closest to her, begin to notice the seeds of this so-called plan? This is where things get uncomfortable, because the Meghan we see today, the Duchess turned global brand, the woman who shook the monarchy to its core, is the same Meghan who once studied how people like Diana or Kate captivated the world. She didn't just admire them. She analyzed them. She dissected how fairy tales are written in real time. And here's the chilling twist. Doria now admits Meghan was never naive about this world. She wasn't swept into the palace halls wide-eyed and unprepared. She had considered the dangers. She had considered the rewards. And, perhaps most haunting of all, she had considered the exit. Ask yourself, why would a woman who never looked up Harry online, who claimed she had no knowledge of the monarchy, suddenly execute one of the most stunning departures in royal history with military-level precision? Could anyone really pull that off without years of mental rehearsal? The public wants to believe in love stories. We want to believe in chance meetings. We want to believe in fairy tales where an ordinary girl captures a prince's heart and lives happily ever after. But what if this wasn't a fairy tale? What if it was a screenplay? One Meghan had been writing in her head since the moment she realized Hollywood would never give her the crown she craved. Doria's role in this story is fascinating. For years, she stayed back, watching, listening, supporting her daughter, but never speaking out. Friends whispered about her calm demeanor, about her yoga teachings, about her wisdom. But now she reveals that Meghan's ambitions were not born the day Harry proposed. They had roots. They had intention. And when she finally broke her silence, it was not to protect Meghan's image. It was to tell the truth, even if that truth cast her daughter in a very different light. Now imagine sitting across from your own mother, hearing her admit to the world that you had plotted out your escape years before the cameras ever flashed. Imagine the betrayal Meghan must feel at Doria's words. Or perhaps Meghan expected this moment all along. Perhaps she knew the truth couldn't stay buried forever. And that's why this revelation matters now. Because for years, Meghan has painted herself as the victim of the press, of the palace, of circumstance. But if Doria's words are true, then Meghan was never just a victim. She was the architect. She wasn't trapped in the palace. She built the palace into her ladder. She wasn't silenced. She was scripting her own voice. This changes everything. It reframes the Oprah interview. It reframes the Netflix deal. It reframes the very image of Meghan Markle that the world consumed. And it forces us to ask a dangerous question. Was Harry ever the prize? Or was he always just the piece Meghan needed to unlock the door to global superstardom? I want you to really sit with that. Think about it. Do you believe in the Meghan we've been sold, the unsuspecting Duchess overwhelmed by royal tradition? Or do you believe in the Meghan Doria has now revealed, the woman who mapped her rise and her escape with chilling precision? And here's the part that makes this so compelling. This is not just gossip. This is not just tabloid fuel. This is a confession from the one person who has remained silent through it all. This is the voice of the mother who raised Meghan, who stood in that chapel watching her daughter marry into the most ancient dynasty in the world, who has now decided that the time has come to let us see behind the curtain. But why now? Why break silence after so many years? Was it guilt? Was it pressure? Or was it simply the truth, too heavy to carry anymore? Because as we'll discover, this isn't just a revelation about Meghan. It's a revelation about how power works, how image is crafted, how fairy tales are sold, and how one woman may have played the game so masterfully that even a 1,000-year-old monarchy didn't see it coming until it was too late. And if you think this is shocking, if you think Meghan's plan to marry into royalty and then escape for fame is already a bombshell, just wait. Because the next part of Doria's confession, the details of when, how, and why Meghan began shaping this plan, will leave you speechless. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Who was Meghan Markle before the world knew her name? Before the glossy magazine covers, before the grand royal wedding watched by billions, before the Netflix deals and the Oprah sit-downs? Who was she, really, in those years when she was still clawing her way toward the spotlight? Because if you want to understand Doria Ragland's shocking confession, if you want to believe that Meghan planned her royal escape years before even meeting Harry, you have to go back to where it all started. And trust me, what you find in Meghan's early life isn't just the story of an ambitious girl chasing dreams. It's the story of a woman meticulously preparing for a destiny she wasn't born into, but one she fully intended to claim. Let's strip away the titles, the tiaras, the royal branding, and look at Meghan as a child, a teenager, and then a young woman. Meghan grew up in Los Angeles, the daughter of a Hollywood lighting director and a yoga instructor. She wasn't born with privilege, but she wasn't raised in poverty either. She was a girl with a foot in two worlds, close enough to taste the glamour of Hollywood, but far enough to feel like an outsider. And outsiders often become the hungriest climbers. Even as a child, Meghan's teachers and friends described her as unusually focused, unusually polished. She wasn't the kid who melted into the background. She was the kid who knew how to get noticed. Think about that. At an age when most children are still fumbling through awkwardness, Meghan was already learning how to project, how to manage her image, how to navigate environments that weren't built to welcome her. Isn't that exactly the kind of training ground for someone who would later walk into Buckingham Palace and hold her own against centuries of tradition? But here's the eerie part. Doria, Meghan's mother, now claims that even back then, Meghan spoke in ways that revealed her hunger for something more. Not just success, not just fame, something enduring, something monumental. She would look at iconic figures, not just Hollywood stars, but political and royal women, and analyze them. How did they speak? How did they command attention? How did they turn their presence into power? Pause for a second. Doesn't that strike you as unusual? Most aspiring actresses in Los Angeles dream of starring roles, red carpets, maybe an Oscar. Meghan, on the other hand, seemed to be studying queens, princesses, and first ladies. She wasn't just looking for applause. She was studying legacies. And here's where the first cracks appear in the innocent Meghan narrative. The Meghan who later told the world she didn't really know much about Harry or didn't understand what the royal family truly represented is the same Meghan who, as Doria admits, had long been fascinated by royal archetypes. She didn't stumble into that palace. She studied the playbook years before she ever set foot inside it. Let's fast forward a bit. Meghan at Northwestern University. She studies theater and international relations, a strange but telling combination. On one hand, She's learning performance, craft, stage presence. On the other, she's diving into politics, diplomacy, and global systems of power. Who pairs those fields unless they're already thinking beyond Hollywood? Unless they're already imagining themselves as more than just an actress, but as a figure with international reach? Now, consider the people Meghan surrounded herself with during these years. She gravitated toward professors and mentors who encouraged her ambition. She networked aggressively, even when it seemed premature. Friends noticed how Meghan always seemed to have a plan, not just for the next semester, but for her life. Isn't that the hallmark of someone who doesn't leave things to chance? Hollywood, of course, became her testing ground. Meghan's early acting career was rocky, small parts, minor credits, hustling from audition to audition. She was grinding, no doubt, but she wasn't just grinding blindly. She was learning how the machine worked. She saw the way fame could lift you up and chew you out. She saw the fickle nature of celebrity. And according to Doria's subtle admissions, Meghan didn't just want to be one of hundreds of Hollywood hopefuls clawing for recognition. She wanted something bulletproof. Something no cancellation, no failed audition, no fading relevance could erase. And what, in this world, offers bulletproof fame? Royalty. Here's a chilling detail many forget. Long before Harry, Meghan was vocal, sometimes jokingly, sometimes seriously, about wanting to be a princess. Old classmates remember her daydreams about fairy tales, not in the way children fantasize, but in the way young women plot. She saw fairy tales not as stories, but as templates. She was paying attention. By the time Meghan landed her breakout role in Suits, she had polished her public persona to a sheen. She wasn't just Rachel Zane the paralegal. She was Meghan Markle, the activist, the fashion-forward intellectual, the humanitarian in the making. Every interview, every blog post on the TIG, every carefully staged photo wasn't just random content. It was brand building. It was image management. And guess what? Doria now hints that all of this wasn't simply organic. It was deliberate. Meghan wasn't just sharing her life. She was sculpting her legend. Think about the TIG for a moment, her now-defunct lifestyle blog. To casual fans, it was a fun, glossy side project. To Meghan, it was a portfolio. A carefully curated image of sophistication, worldliness, and refinement. She was presenting herself as someone already adjacent to royalty, long before Harry ever entered the scene. Doesn't that make you wonder? Was Meghan already rehearsing for the role of Duchess, crafting the aura of someone who belonged in castles and palaces, rather than Hollywood backlots? Let's circle back to Doria. Imagine being a mother watching your daughter take all these steps. Watching her talk about power, analyze queens, build a brand around elegance and humanitarianism. Wouldn't you start to think, she's not just chasing fame. She's chasing something much bigger. That's exactly the impression Doria eventually revealed. Meghan wasn't improvising her way through life. She was executing. But here's where the story gets darker. Because ambition by itself is admirable. Drive is admirable. Wanting to leave a mark is admirable. But what if that ambition was fueled by a plan that always had an expiration date on her royal marriage? What if Harry was never the happy ending, but always the middle act? Meghan's pre-Harry years are full of these breadcrumbs. Her calculated networking, her fixation on image, her attraction to men of influence, her fascination with power structures. All of it paints a portrait of someone who was positioning herself long before destiny supposedly found her. And this is where we hit the cliffhanger. Because if Meghan's rise before Harry already looks like a blueprint in progress, then what happens the moment Harry actually walks into the picture? If she was this strategic before, imagine how much more precise, more ruthless, and more rehearsed the plan became once a real-life prince became the key to unlocking everything she had been preparing for. Because what came next didn't just change Meghan's life. It changed the monarchy. And it left Harry walking straight into a story he didn't realize had been written long before he ever said hello. What would make a mother break her silence after years of carefully staying in the background? What could be so pressing, so undeniable, that Doria Ragland, the woman who watched her daughter transform from Meghan Markle, the Hollywood hopeful, into Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, finally felt the need to speak? That's the question that haunts this chapter. Because when Doria's voice entered this story, it didn't come in whispers. It came like an earthquake, shifting the entire narrative we thought we knew. For years, Doria was the silent shadow. At Meghan's wedding to Prince Harry, she sat alone, regal, dignified, the picture of quiet strength. Cameras zoomed in on her face, and the world admired her poise. Yet behind that calm exterior, she was holding a truth that would shake the fairy tale to its core. She didn't reveal it then. She didn't reveal it when the tabloids attacked her daughter. She didn't reveal it during Oprah's explosive interview. She didn't even reveal it when the Netflix series painted Meghan as a victim of royal cruelty. But she has revealed it now, and the weight of what she says is nothing short of devastating. Let's rewind to that moment when Doria first hinted at Meghan's intentions. According to those close to her, she spoke not with bitterness, not with anger, but with a weary honesty. She said Meghan had been preparing for this life long before Harry ever entered the picture. Imagine the gravity of that statement. For years, the official story has been that Meghan was swept into the royal machine, unprepared, innocent, even naive. But Doria's confession shatters that. It suggests Meghan wasn't blindsided, she was strategizing. Picture it, a young Meghan, still hustling through Hollywood auditions, telling her mother she wasn't just looking for a role, she was looking for a crown. Doria, with her measured and grounded perspective, tried to support her daughter but knew deep down what this meant. She saw the ambition. She saw the obsession with image. She saw the calculated steps. And now, with time having passed and the world having judged Meghan from every angle, Doria is ready to admit she saw it all coming. Stop for a moment and think about the betrayal wrapped up in this. A mother's love is supposed to protect, to shield. Yet here we have Doria confirming suspicions the public has whispered about for years. Why would she do that? Why would she risk her daughter's reputation, her carefully built narrative, by admitting Meghan had mapped out her royal escape? Unless the truth had grown too heavy to carry. Unless, by keeping silent, she was complicit in a deception larger than anyone realized. This is where it gets personal. Doria wasn't just any witness. She wasn't a distant relative or a tabloid insider. She was there, in the living room, in the car rides, in the private conversations when Meghan spoke candidly. When Meghan tested ideas out loud. When Meghan revealed pieces of her inner world that no one else could hear. Doria's confession is so powerful precisely because of this intimacy. Who knows a daughter better than her mother? But there's another layer. Doria, by all accounts, adored Harry. She saw how much he loved Meghan. She saw the vulnerability in him, the way he was looking for love after a lifetime of trauma. And perhaps that's what weighs on her now. Perhaps the guilt of knowing Harry didn't just fall for Meghan. He walked into a story already scripted, was too much for Doria to carry quietly. Think about this. Doria's silence during the Oprah interview was deafening. She sat in the background while Meghan and Harry painted a picture of themselves as victims of a cold, heartless monarchy. But what if she knew the truth all along? What if she knew Meghan had rehearsed this very narrative long before reality caught up to it? Isn't that why her confession now feels like betrayal not just to Meghan, but to Harry as well? And here's where we see the cracks widen. Doria admitted Meghan's fascination with royalty wasn't just childhood play. It was an obsession carried into adulthood. Meghan didn't just dream about palaces. She studied them. She studied Diana. She studied Kate. She studied the mechanics of how women married into the monarchy and captured global attention. To the public, Meghan claimed ignorance. I didn't even Google Harry. To her mother, she revealed a different side. A side that was not only informed, but calculated. What does this say about the woman the world thought it knew? What does it say about the fairy tale romance when the fairy tale was, in fact, a strategy? Doria's confession isn't angry. It isn't cruel. It's almost resigned. Like a woman who has watched her daughter play a dangerous game and now realizes the truth can no longer stay buried. And in that resignation is a warning. A warning that Meghan's story was never going to end at the palace gates. That from the very beginning, the marriage was a bridge, not a destination. But why say it now? Why break her silence at this moment? Some believe it's because the world has reached peak fatigue with Meghan and Harry. The sympathy, well, has dried up. The contradictions in Meghan's narrative have become too glaring. And Doria, ever the realist, knows the time has come to speak before history is written without her input. Others whisper that she is trying to protect herself, that by admitting Meghan's plan, she distances herself from the backlash Meghan continues to face. Whatever the reason, the impact is seismic. With just a few words, Doria has reframed the entire saga. Meghan was not the wide-eyed innocent swept into a centuries-old machine. She was the architect of her own story, the planner of her own escape, the woman who used a prince not for love, but for leverage. And if that's true, then every moment of Meghan's royal journey, from the engagement photos to the Oprah interview, suddenly looks different. Every tear, every smile, every claim of ignorance now carries the shadow of Doria's confession. But here's the cliffhanger. Doria has only just begun to speak. What she revealed in these first words is shocking enough, but the details, the specific conversations, the moments where Meghan allegedly outlined her blueprint for royal escape, those are still to come. And when those details surface, they won't just damage Meghan's image. They could dismantle the fairy tale entirely. Because if Doria's confession is true, then Harry was never the hero of the story. He was the pawn, and Meghan was never the victim. She was the mastermind. And the next part of this story will show you exactly how that obsession with royalty transformed into a plan so detailed, so audacious, that not even the monarchy itself saw it coming. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever wondered what fuels an obsession so powerful it shapes someone's destiny? Not a fleeting interest, not a passing curiosity. An obsession so deep it becomes the compass guiding every decision, every relationship, every carefully chosen step. That's what Doria Ragland hinted at when she finally admitted that Meghan Markle's fascination with royalty wasn't just a childhood fantasy. It was a fixation that grew, matured, and eventually hardened into a strategy. And it's in this phase, what we'll call Meghan's royal obsession, that the blueprint for her escape began to take shape. Now, pause for a moment. Think back to when you were younger. Maybe you admired a celebrity, a sports figure, a political leader. You might have followed their style, their attitude, even their philosophy for a while. But then life moved on, right? For Meghan, life didn't move on. The fascination only grew stronger. And according to her mother, this wasn't just admiration, it was analysis. Meghan wasn't just inspired by figures like Diana or Kate Middleton. She was studying them. Here's the shocking part. Even as Meghan hustled through auditions in Los Angeles, even as she carved out a modest career on Suits, she was storing away lessons from the monarchy. How Diana captivated the masses not just with her beauty, but with her vulnerability. How Kate managed to project quiet elegance without ever overshadowing William. Meghan saw patterns. She saw how public sympathy, tragedy, and carefully curated appearances could elevate someone from royal by marriage to global icon. Let's go deeper. Friends from Meghan's college years at Northwestern remember her fascination with the idea of being a princess. Not in the fairy tale sense, but in a serious, almost deliberate way. She spoke of power structures, of women who managed to shift global conversations simply by marrying into the right family. Imagine hearing that in a dorm room conversation. At the time, it probably sounded whimsical. But now, knowing what we know, it sounds like a roadmap. And then there was Diana. Meghan didn't just admire Diana the fashion icon. She idolized Diana the rebel, Diana the woman who took on the crown, Diana the tragic figure who captured eternal sympathy. Meghan saw in Diana not just a princess, but a brand that transcended royalty. Doesn't it make you wonder, was Meghan already imagining herself as the sequel to Diana's global story? Here's the contradiction that makes this all so chilling. Years later, Meghan told the world she didn't really know much about Harry or didn't understand what the royal family truly represented. But according to Doria's quiet admissions, that simply wasn't true. Meghan had been watching the royals for years. She had been internalizing their moves, their successes, their failures. She wasn't naive about what she was stepping into. She was prepared. Now let's bring in Kate Middleton. Meghan often spoke of Kate in interviews with admiration, graceful, elegant, seemingly perfect. But behind the compliments was a different kind of fascination. Kate represented the successful outsider who had managed to not only marry into royalty, but survive its suffocating traditions. Meghan watched Kate, too. She noticed the way Kate endured the press, how she kept her composure, how she cultivated a sense of loyalty without ever appearing too ambitious. Kate was, in Meghan's eyes, proof that the impossible could be done. And yet, Meghan's personality was different. She wasn't content to play by the rules quietly. She wanted to bend them. But here's where things turned darker. According to Doria, Meghan didn't just admire Diana and Kate. She compared herself to them. She believed she had what they had: charisma, beauty, intelligence, but with an edge they lacked. Meghan saw herself as someone who could not only fit into that world but eventually outshine it. And once she began speaking about it in those terms, the obsession wasn't just inspiration anymore. It was aspiration. Think about the psychology of this for a second. To most people, royalty is an untouchable concept. It's a fantasy you laugh about, then dismiss. But Meghan wasn't dismissing it. She was preparing for it. She wasn't imagining herself as Cinderella waiting for a prince. She was rehearsing how she would become Diana 2.0, only this time, without the tragedy. This time, she would write the ending herself. Friends noticed the small details. Meghan collected books about princesses and powerful women. She wrote about female empowerment in ways that always seemed to connect back to influence, image, and legacy. And even her humanitarian work, visiting Rwanda, working with UN women, fit into this larger vision. Yes, it was meaningful work, but it also mirrored the kind of causes associated with royals. Was this coincidence? Or was it practice? Here's the kicker. Meghan's blog, The Tig, included an essay where she admitted she once dreamed of being a princess. On the surface, it seemed lighthearted. But when you place it against Doria's confession, that essay reads like a breadcrumb. Meghan wasn't hiding her obsession. She was dropping hints all along. And the public missed them. Let's ask the audience directly. Do you think it's possible to map out your life this way? To study others so intensely that you essentially script your future? Or does this sound like a conspiracy too far? Keep that question in your head, because as this story unfolds, you'll see just how eerily accurate Meghan's script turned out to be. Now let's turn to Doria. Imagine being a mother, hearing your daughter talk about these ambitions. Hearing her say she wanted more than just Hollywood. That she wanted something historic. That she wasn't just chasing success. She was chasing immortality through image. What do you say? Do you encourage it? Do you warn her? According to Doria's quiet confessions, she mostly stayed silent. She supported Meghan, but she also worried. She knew her daughter wasn't just ambitious. She was relentless. And that relentlessness, Doria now admits, was always tied to the royals. Meghan wasn't daydreaming about fame in vague terms. She wasn't talking about movie star fantasies. She was mapping out how one day she could be royalty, and then how she could escape royalty to become bigger than royalty itself. That's the heart of Doria's revelation. Meghan's obsession was never about fitting in. It was about breaking free, on her own terms, with the world's attention. But here's where the chapter must end, on the knife's edge of revelation. Because obsession alone isn't enough. Fascination doesn't translate into power without strategy. And Meghan's next phase wasn't about studying anymore. It was about acting. It was about cultivating the friendships, the connections, the carefully constructed public image that would eventually open the door to her prince. And once that door opened, the plan would accelerate in ways no one, least of all Harry, was prepared for. Because what came next would turn Meghan's obsession into opportunity. An opportunity, in her hands, was about to change the royal family forever. What if I told you Meghan Markle's climb to royalty didn't begin with Harry at all? What if the real foundation of her rise was built in Hollywood, through carefully chosen friendships, calculated alliances, and deliberate positioning in social circles that mattered? Because here's the truth. Meghan wasn't just waiting around for destiny to knock. She was out there making moves, weaving her way into networks of influence. And according to Doria's quiet but cutting confession, those friendships weren't just casual connections. They were stepping stones in a much bigger plan. Let's set the scene. Meghan is in Los Angeles, trying to break into an industry that eats people alive. Most young actresses scrape by, taking whatever roles they can. Meghan? She wasn't just taking jobs, she was collecting people. She understood early that Hollywood isn't about talent alone. It's about access. who you know, who can open the door, who can place you in the right room at the right time. And Meghan played that game like a pro. Think about the people she surrounded herself with. From stylists to casting directors, from producers' assistants to fashion influencers, Meghan always seemed to know someone who could lift her up a rung higher. And here's the kicker. Many of those connections later linked her, directly or indirectly, to royalty. Coincidence? Or part of a carefully cultivated strategy? Take Jessica Mulroney, for example, a Canadian stylist with connections to the political elite, including the Trudeaus. Meghan didn't just stumble into Jessica's orbit, she positioned herself there. Jessica became not only a friend, but a bridge into powerful social networks. When Meghan later met Harry, who happened to move in circles connected to Canada, that bond with Jessica suddenly looked less like chance and more like foresight. But Jessica wasn't the only one. Meghan's network expanded into the world of philanthropists, fashion designers, and global activists. She attended the right galas, posed for the right photographers, supported the right causes. Each connection seemed to elevate her brand. Each friendship seemed less about companionship and more about alignment. Alignment with the kind of image that could one day pass seamlessly into royalty. Now let's be honest. Lots of ambitious people network. Lots of women in Hollywood cultivate friendships for survival. But what sets Meghan apart, at least according to Doria's hints, is the sheer precision of it all. Meghan wasn't just looking for opportunities. She was curating a narrative. A story of herself as worldly, humanitarian, elegant, and socially conscious. Sound familiar? That's the very image the royals prize. The very image Diana embodied. The very image Meghan would later sell to the world when she married Harry. Let's not forget Meghan's blog, The Tig. On the surface, it was a lifestyle brand. But dig deeper, and it was a portfolio. She wasn't just writing about travel and wine. She was presenting herself as cultured, sophisticated, global. It was a glossy brochure for Meghan Markle, the woman who belonged on a world stage. And who helped amplify that blog? Hollywood friends, influencers, connections she cultivated with laser focus. And here's the emotional gut punch. Doria admits she saw all this unfolding. She saw her daughter moving through friendships like chess pieces. She saw her curating images, aligning herself with power players, projecting an aura that was far bigger than the roles she was booking. Meghan wasn't content with being just another actress. She was rehearsing for something else entirely. Now let's talk about Trevor Engelson, Meghan's first husband, a Hollywood producer. Someone who gave Meghan not just a personal relationship, but an insider's view of how the industry really worked. Their marriage didn't last, but ask yourself, what did Meghan learn in those years? How to navigate Hollywood, how to build relationships, how to balance image with ambition. Was that marriage part of her personal journey, or was it another stepping stone? Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Doria allegedly admitted Meghan didn't see relationships the way most people do. She saw them as partnerships, sometimes temporary, sometimes transactional. That doesn't mean she didn't feel love, but it does mean she weighed them differently. She asked, where does this take me? What does this align me with? And if you view Meghan's Hollywood years through that lens, every friendship, every event, every Instagram photo suddenly looks like part of a ladder. Think of the parallels to royalty again. Diana was adored for her causes. Kate was admired for her elegance. Meghan was building her own version, only outside the palace walls first. She wasn't waiting for Harry to come along and hand her that image. She was crafting it herself, so that when Harry did appear, she was ready. More than ready. She already looked the part. Now ask yourself, do you think Harry would have been so captivated by Meghan if she hadn't already built this carefully curated image? If she had been just another actress struggling for roles? Or was it the fact that she had already aligned herself with the right people, projected the right aura, and polished herself into someone who looked like she belonged in his world? And here's the chilling irony. Meghan once told interviewers that she never thought about becoming royal, that it was all so sudden. But Doria's confession paints a different picture. Meghan's Hollywood friendships weren't just friendships. They were rehearsals, each one positioning her closer and closer to the role she had always wanted to play. But here's the cliffhanger. Because no matter how many friendships she cultivated, no matter how carefully she built her brand, Meghan's plan needed one thing she couldn't create on her own: access to a prince. And when that opportunity finally came, Meghan wasn't the innocent actress stumbling into a romance. She was the strategist who had already prepared her stage. And when Harry walked onto that stage, Meghan's royal obsession collided with her Hollywood training. The result? A love story that looked spontaneous, but may have been rehearsed long before. But what came next would turn rehearsals into reality, and Harry into the centerpiece of a plan no one else could see. What if I told you the moment Meghan Markle met Prince Harry was not the start of a love story, but the execution of a plan? Not fate, not chance, but the exact opportunity Meghan had been preparing for, waiting for, and, if Doria Ragland's words are true, dreaming into reality for years. Because when Harry finally walked into her orbit, Meghan wasn't an unassuming actress caught off guard by a royal proposal. She was ready, perfectly polished, perfectly positioned, and perfectly aware of what this relationship could mean. Let's start at the beginning. The public story is simple: a blind date in London, set up by mutual friends. A whirlwind romance. A royal engagement that stunned the world. But how blind was that date really? And how much of it was chance versus choreography? Think about it. Meghan's social circle by this point already included people deeply connected to the aristocracy, politics, and high society. Jessica Mulroney. Marcus Anderson of Soho House. A man with a Rolodex of royals, celebrities, and billionaires. Meghan wasn't hanging out with struggling actors anymore. She was orbiting the very world Harry belonged to. Does that sound like coincidence? Or careful alignment? Now picture Meghan walking into that first meeting. Harry, the spare prince, haunted by the loss of his mother, lonely, vulnerable, yet still one of the most eligible bachelors in the world. Meghan, the actress with global ambitions, already versed in humanitarian causes, already radiating the princess image she had cultivated for years. Was Harry really choosing Meghan? Or was Meghan presenting herself as the inevitable choice? And here's where Doria's confession slices through the fairy tale. According to her, Meghan had been speaking of the royals long before Harry. She knew the symbolism of Diana. She knew the aura of Kate. She knew what it meant to marry into that family, and she wasn't afraid of it. In fact, she had prepared for it. So when Harry came along, Meghan didn't hesitate. She knew this was the opportunity her blueprint had been designed for. But let's go deeper. Harry wasn't just any royal. He was the perfect royal for Meghan's plan. William was already taken, tied up in the expectations of a future king. Harry, on the other hand, carried both the glamour of Diana's legacy and the freedom of being the spare. He had status, wealth, and a brokenness that made him malleable. He wanted love. He wanted escape. He wanted someone who would stand with him against the institution. Can you imagine a more perfect match for Meghan's ambitions? The chemistry was undeniable. Even critics admit Harry was smitten almost instantly. But pause for a second. What was it about Meghan that hooked him so completely, so quickly? Was it love at first sight? Or was it the fact that Meghan was everything Harry didn't know he was looking for? Empathetic, worldly, rebellious, and unafraid of the press? Qualities she had curated, perfected, and deployed at exactly the right moment. Let's not forget how swiftly the romance escalated. Within weeks, Harry was introducing Meghan into his private world. Within months, she was meeting the Queen. Within just over a year, they were engaged. Does that pace sound like a casual unfolding of romance? Or like a perfectly executed script? Now consider the contradictions. Meghan later told interviewers she didn't know much about Harry before meeting him, claiming she never Googled him. But ask yourself, do you believe that? An actress who had been blogging about princess fantasies, who had studied Diana, who had aligned herself with royal-adjacent social circles, suddenly claims ignorance about one of the most famous men on earth? Even Doria's quiet admissions cast doubt on that story. Meghan didn't stumble into this. She prepared for it. Doria's insight makes it even sharper. She recalls Meghan speaking about power, image, and legacy long before Harry arrived. To her, Harry wasn't just a boyfriend. He was the key to unlocking the next phase of her plan. And as Doria now admits, Meghan wasn't just looking at the romance. She was looking at the brand. Let's bring this closer to the audience. Imagine you're Meghan in that moment. You've spent years grinding in Hollywood, never quite breaking through. You've cultivated friendships, built a lifestyle brand, aligned yourself with humanitarian causes. And then, suddenly, you're sitting across from Prince Harry, the man whose story is tied to the most famous woman of the 20th century, Diana. Do you think Meghan saw Harry as just a man? Or as the opportunity to step directly into the spotlight she had always envisioned for herself? Harry, meanwhile, was vulnerable. Tired of being judged, tired of being overshadowed, desperate for someone who would love him for who he was. Meghan offered that, or at least seemed to. She was warm, attentive, empathetic. She told him exactly what he wanted to hear, that she would stand by him, that she didn't care about the palace politics, that she wanted to support him. And Harry fell, hard. But here's the chilling twist. According to Doria, Meghan had already considered not just what it meant to marry Harry, but what it would mean to leave him. From the very beginning, she spoke of independence, of freedom, of carving out her own path. Marriage wasn't the endgame. It was the launchpad. And Harry, tragically, may never have realized that until it was too late. Look closely at the timeline. Meghan and Harry's relationship wasn't just fast, it was turbocharged. Engagement, wedding, royal duties, all compressed into a short window. Why? Was it love rushing forward? Or was it urgency? Meghan pushing the story forward before the palace, the press, or Harry himself could slow down and ask too many questions. And here's where we end this chapter, with a cliffhanger that should make your heart stop. Because if Meghan was this prepared, this strategic, this deliberate before the marriage, then what does that say about what happened inside the palace walls? What secrets did she carry with her into that world? And how did she begin to plant the seeds of the escape she had already envisioned? Because the marriage was never the destination. It was the beginning. And the moment Meghan said, "I do," the clock started ticking, not toward a happy ending, but toward the most explosive royal exit in modern history. But what came next would prove that the wedding was not the finale, it was just Act 1. And Act 2 would shake the monarchy to its core. Have you ever noticed how fairy tales look perfect from the outside, but behind the scenes they're full of cracks? That's exactly what happened during Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's courtship. On the surface, it was a whirlwind romance. The charming prince and the glamorous actress, swept up in a love story straight out of a storybook. But pull back the curtain, and the reality is far more complex. And if we believe Doria Ragland's quiet revelations, far more calculated. Because what unfolded behind the scenes of that royal courtship wasn't just romance. It was choreography. Think about the timeline. Their relationship moved at lightning speed, meeting in 2016, engagement in 2017, marriage in 2018. Royal watchers couldn't believe how fast it all happened. But ask yourself, who was pushing the accelerator? Was it Harry, eager to finally settle down? Or was it Meghan, ensuring her carefully prepared plan advanced before anyone could start asking uncomfortable questions? Now let's go back to the early days. Those secret trips to Botswana. Those cozy photos leaked to the press. Those sudden, chance appearances that fed the tabloids just enough to keep the buzz alive. Do you really think all of that was accidental? Meghan had spent years building her brand in Hollywood. She knew the value of timing, of controlled leaks, of cultivating mystery. And suddenly, every move in their courtship seemed perfectly timed to capture maximum attention. Here's the contradiction that stands out. Meghan later claimed she didn't understand what royal life meant. Yet during their courtship, she appeared in exactly the right places, wore exactly the right looks, and struck exactly the right notes to charm not only Harry but also the cameras. Is that ignorance or preparation? Let's dig into the family introductions. Most people who date royalty face months, sometimes years, of scrutiny before being brought into the royal fold. Meghan, however, met senior royals quickly. Why? Because Harry insisted she was the one. But was Harry's certainty truly his own? Or was it the result of Meghan knowing exactly how to play her role in those early days? And this is where Doria's voice cuts in. She admits Meghan wasn't blindsided by palace protocol. She was ready. She had anticipated the hurdles. She had thought about what it would mean to walk beside a prince. Doria, watching all of this, could see the gears turning. Meghan wasn't improvising. She was executing. Ask yourself, when Harry brought Meghan to meet the Queen for the first time, what kind of woman did she present herself as? Sweet, respectful, grateful, exactly what the monarchy would hope for. But then think about the engagement interview later. Meghan, smiling beside Harry, claimed she had no idea who he really was before meeting him. Really? A Hollywood actress who studied global power structures and humanitarian work had never Googled the most famous bachelor in the world? Even Doria now admits that wasn't true. The engagement itself was the ultimate performance. The photo shoot, the BBC interview, the body language, Meghan holding Harry's hand, gazing at him like he was the center of her world. To the public, it looked authentic. To Doria, it looked rehearsed. Every tilt of the head, every laugh, every tender touch, scripted for maximum effect. But let's go deeper. Meghan wasn't just presenting herself to Harry. She was presenting herself to the world. She knew millions were watching. She knew headlines would be written. And she knew how to feed them the exact image she wanted to project. The modern, independent woman who was still humble enough to join a centuries-old institution. Yet even in those carefully staged moments, there were cracks. Meghan's friends whispered that she seemed overly prepared. Some wondered if she was acting rather than living. Harry didn't notice. He was too in love. But Doria noticed. She saw her daughter performing not just for Harry, but for history. And here's where the tension builds. Because while Meghan was playing her role flawlessly in public, behind closed doors, she was already voicing frustrations. Frustrations about the press, about palace traditions, about the scrutiny. She told Harry she loved him, but she also told him she didn't intend to lose herself in the monarchy. From the very beginning, Meghan was planting seeds. Seeds of independence. Seeds of escape. Now stop and think about that. Before the wedding vows were even exchanged, Meghan was already outlining her boundaries. Already hinting at her exit strategy. Already preparing Harry for the idea that they might one day walk away. To the public, this was a fairy tale racing toward the altar. To Meghan, it was the opening act of a plan she had envisioned for years. And here's the heartbreaking twist. Harry, so desperate for love and stability, didn't see it. He believed Meghan was his chance to finally build the family he longed for. He thought he was escaping the loneliness of royal life. In reality, he was stepping straight into Meghan's script. Let's not forget the press coverage during their courtship. Stories about Meghan's background, her family, her ambition, her previous marriage. Some were harsh, some sympathetic. But what did Meghan do? She turned the narrative to her advantage. She painted herself as the outsider, the underdog, the woman brave enough to love a prince despite the odds. Doesn't that sound familiar? It's the Diana playbook all over again. Vulnerability turned into power. Criticism turned into sympathy. And this brings us to the cliffhanger. Because if Meghan was already planting the seeds of independence before the wedding, what does that mean about the marriage itself? Was it ever about building a life inside the palace? Or was it always about setting the stage for the most dramatic royal exit in modern history? Because the wedding wasn't the culmination of their love. It was the launch pad of Meghan's plan. And inside the palace walls, where the cameras couldn't see, the cracks were about to widen into chasms. But what came next would prove that the marriage was never meant to last inside the crown. It was meant to explode out of it, and the monarchy would never recover. The bells rang. The world watched. Billions tuned in to see the fairy tale of a lifetime, an American actress marrying into the most famous monarchy on earth. The wedding of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry was sold as history, as love conquering all odds, as a new era for the royals. But what if I told you that even as Meghan walked down that aisle, smiling beneath her veil, the seeds of her escape had already been planted? That even at the altar, she wasn't just saying, "I do." She was setting the stage for Act 2 of her plan. Because marriage, for Meghan, wasn't the destination. It was the entry point. Let's start with the wedding itself. Windsor Castle. A global spectacle. Every detail curated, from the gospel choir singing "Stand By Me" to the presence of A-list celebrities like Oprah, Serena Williams, and George Clooney. This wasn't just a royal wedding. This was a Hollywood red carpet meets Buckingham Palace production. And who orchestrated that blend? Meghan. She infused her wedding with her own brand, her own cultural identity, her own network of connections. To the world, it looked fresh, modern, inclusive. But to those who looked closer, it looked like a woman declaring, "I may be marrying into the monarchy, but I will never disappear into it." Doria Ragland sat alone in the front row, dignified, composed. The cameras captured her pride. But what the cameras didn't capture was her knowledge. Because according to her later confession, Doria already knew Meghan's mind. She knew her daughter wasn't entering that chapel as a woman ready to surrender herself to royal duty. She was entering as a strategist who had rehearsed every move, who was already thinking beyond the vows. Now let's talk about Harry. Poor Harry. He was radiant that day, smiling like a man who believed he had finally found his escape from loneliness, his partner in life. He thought he was bringing Meghan into his world. In reality, Meghan was about to pull him into hers. And Doria, sitting there silently, knew this. Imagine that. A mother, watching her daughter marry a prince, knowing full well the marriage wasn't the happily ever after the world thought. The symbolism of the wedding was staggering. Meghan chose to walk part of the aisle alone, a move interpreted as independence, strength, modern womanhood. But look deeper. It was also a statement. I don't need the monarchy to validate me. I am my own force. That image reverberated across the world. Meghan wasn't blending into the crown. She was bending it toward her. Now consider the guest list. This was no ordinary royal guest list stacked with dukes and duchesses. It was star-studded, a spectacle of Hollywood glamour. It was Meghan bringing her world into the monarchy, not the other way around. And that's crucial, because from the very beginning, Meghan's marriage wasn't about assimilation. It was about insertion. She wasn't being absorbed by the institution. She was injecting herself into it like a disruptor. And here's the emotional core of it all. While the world cried happy tears watching Harry and Meghan kiss on the steps of Windsor, Meghan's closest confidants whispered something else. They whispered that Meghan's ambitions didn't end here. That marriage was just the start of a larger vision. And now, with Doria's confirmation, those whispers look prophetic. Pause for a second. Ask yourself, do you believe Meghan, an ambitious, calculated woman who had curated her image for years, suddenly gave all that up to become a silent, submissive duchess? Or do you believe she entered that marriage knowing exactly how she would use it to build her next chapter? Let's not forget the contradictions. In interviews after the wedding, Meghan painted herself as naive. She said she didn't know what it meant to marry into the royal family. She claimed she was blindsided by the traditions, the expectations, the scrutiny. But think back. Meghan had already spent years studying Diana, admiring Kate, curating her humanitarian work to mirror royal causes. Do you really think she walked into that chapel with no idea? Or was she already preparing for the fallout, the eventual break, the chance to rebrand herself as the woman who challenged the monarchy? And here's where it gets darker. Doria recalls Meghan expressing doubts about the institution even before the wedding. Not doubts about Harry, but doubts about the system she was marrying into. Meghan allegedly told her mother she would never be caged. Imagine that. On the eve of the most watched wedding in the world, Meghan already knew she wouldn't stay. She was walking in with one foot already out the door. The palace didn't see it. They thought they were welcoming a modern duchess who would refresh the monarchy. Instead, they were handing the keys of global sympathy and influence to a woman who had no intention of staying confined within their walls. And the brilliance, or the ruthlessness, of Meghan's strategy is that she never said it outright. She smiled. She charmed. She played the part. And all the while, she was biding her time. The wedding day, then, wasn't just a union. It was a transaction. Meghan gained the title, the visibility, the global platform. Harry gained love, or at least what he thought was love. And Doria, sitting silently in that pew, carried the weight of knowing what her daughter truly intended. And here's the cliffhanger. The world saw the kiss, the carriage ride, the happily ever after. But behind the castle walls, once the cameras stopped rolling, the cracks began almost immediately. The palace expected a duchess who would serve. Meghan was already preparing to rebel. The fairy tale had barely begun before it started to fracture. Because what came next wasn't a honeymoon. It was the beginning of a storm that would tear the royal family apart. Fairy tales don't crack in public. They crack behind closed doors, in whispers, in late-night arguments no one else hears, in moments where the cameras aren't rolling. And that's exactly what began to happen inside the palace walls once Meghan Markle was no longer the blushing bride, but the Duchess of Sussex. The fairy tale was still playing out on television screens around the world. But inside the royal machine, the tension was suffocating. And if we take Doria Ragland's words seriously, those cracks weren't accidents. They were part of the script Meghan had always intended to follow. Think about it. The wedding had been a global triumph. Meghan's entrance into the monarchy was hailed as a new era, diverse, modern, refreshing. The press was giddy with optimism, but it didn't take long before the honeymoon phase ended. Almost immediately, stories began to surface. Meghan was difficult. Meghan was demanding. Meghan made Kate cry. Staff members whispered about her temper, her late-night texts, her refusal to bend to tradition. Was this culture clash? Or was it something deeper, something orchestrated? Let's step into Meghan's world at that time. She was living in Kensington Palace, surrounded by centuries of rules. Every outfit scrutinized, every word analyzed, every movement controlled by courtiers and tradition. To most people, it would feel like suffocation. But for Meghan, according to Doria, it wasn't just suffocation, it was confirmation. Confirmation that she would never truly belong, that she would always be the outsider. And what better way to strengthen her future escape narrative than to lean into that outsider role from the very start? Now, let's not forget, Meghan had trained for this. Hollywood had taught her how to manage image under pressure. She knew how to turn criticism into sympathy. She knew how to frame herself as the underdog. So when palace aides complained about her being demanding, Meghan didn't crumble. She reframed. She was the modern woman, unwilling to bow to outdated customs. She was the humanitarian, too passionate to play by rules designed to keep her silent. Doesn't that sound like a perfect setup for the exit strategy that would come later? Here's where Doria's quiet confessions sting the most. Doria admitted Meghan had warned her even before the wedding that she wouldn't let herself be caged, that she wouldn't play the part of obedient duchess forever. So when the cracks began, when Meghan clashed with Kate, when she resisted the courtiers, when she bristled under the press, it wasn't surprise. It was inevitability. Ask yourself, how could Meghan, who studied Diana so closely, not have anticipated the brutality of the British tabloids? How could she, who admired Kate, not have expected comparisons? She knew exactly what she was stepping into. And yet, instead of assimilating, she leaned into the friction. Was that rebellion or strategy? Harry, meanwhile, was caught in the middle. His loyalty to Meghan clashed with his duty to the crown. And Meghan knew exactly how to play that tension. She reminded him of Diana's pain. She reminded him of how his mother had been broken by the institution. And slowly but surely, Harry began to see the palace not as his family, but as his enemy. Was this manipulation or love? Maybe both. And then there were the staff. Reports leaked of Meghan's aides quitting, some in tears. They said she was harsh, demanding, impossible to please. But flip the perspective. Meghan framed herself as the woman challenging a racist, outdated system. Staff complaints became proof of her oppression. The narrative twisted perfectly in her favor. Doesn't that feel too neat to be coincidence? Doria, watching all of this, remained silent. But now we know she wasn't blind to it. She saw her daughter maneuvering. She saw her daughter using the cracks in the palace as bricks in her escape path. Meghan wasn't just enduring conflict. She was weaponizing it. Every headline, every whisper, every feud with Kate became part of her growing case for independence. Now think about this emotionally. The world wanted Meghan to succeed. They wanted to believe she could modernize the monarchy. But Meghan knew better. She knew she could never truly control the palace. But she could control the exit. She could control the narrative once she left. And every crack behind those palace walls was another justification she could use when the time came to step away. Let's bring in the audience here. Do you think it's possible Meghan didn't know what she was doing? That all of these conflicts were just accidents? Or do you believe, as Doria's words suggest, that Meghan was deliberately building her case, setting up her escape even as she posed for royal portraits? Here's the irony. The palace thought they were breaking Meghan down, that by tightening the rules, by criticizing her, by pushing back, they could mold her into a dutiful duchess. But they didn't realize that every push only made her stronger. Every criticism only fed her eventual narrative of being a victim who fought back. They weren't controlling Meghan. They were fueling her plan. And this brings us to the cliffhanger. Because as the cracks widened inside the palace, Meghan wasn't just bracing herself for survival. She was preparing her next move. A move that would take her story from whispered gossip in Kensington Palace corridors to explosive headlines around the world.